Proper ventilation is an essential component of any roofing system. While this area has been often ignored in the past and your home may not currently have any or have insufficient ventilation, current building science has confirmed the importance of quality roof system ventilation. In this section, I'll explain the importance of proper ventilation and describe the various techniques we use to get the hot and moist air out of your attic. While I'll be talking mostly about attic spaces in this section, I want to clarify that what we're really looking for is a properly ventilated roof deck. Not all homes have attic spaces, or they may have portions of the roof deck that are not above an attic, such as a home with a cathedral ceiling. What we are really hoping to accomplish with ventilation is keeping the underside of the roof deck that the roofing is applied to as uniformly cool and dry as possible. For most people, it's obvious that allowing the air to escape your attic in the summer is important to keeping the attic as cool as possible. It may not be as obvious that ventilation is just as important in winter as it is in the hot months. One purpose of ventilation is to keep the roof decking as cool as possible. Lower temperatures on the underside of the deck will help keep your shingles lasting as long as possible because they are not being routinely baked on a hot summer day. Keep in mind that on a 90-degree day, poorly ventilated attics can reach temperatures easily of 140 degrees or more. This kind of heat is extremely hard on all of the building components, including any air conditioning equipment running in your attic. Now, I have to say, you've got to be realistic about what your ventilation can do. In the hot summer months, even the best ventilated homes and attics are going to be hot, no matter what you do. However, cooling your attic through proper ventilation by 10 or 20 degrees can make a big difference in the long run for the performance and life expectancy of your shingles.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. Please hit subscribe so you can be a part of my channel. You can watch all my videos that cover complete stages of both shingle and metal roofing. There's tons more content coming out soon about all aspects of roofing, including skylights and trim and sheds and whatever you're interested in.
In the winter, the problem with inadequately ventilated attic spaces is the buildup of moisture in the attic and the condensation that results. In the winter, the heated portion of your home forces moisture up into the cooler attic space. When that moisture comes into contact with cool rafters and roof decking, condensation can occur. This condensation can damage and rot the wood, cause the growth of dangerous mold, and drip onto insulation, reducing its effectiveness and even damaging ceilings. This type of moisture buildup can cause serious health and structural problems. If you're thinking that heat might also be ventilated out in the winter, you're right, but the solution is to better insulation on the ceiling rather than trapping all that moisture in your attic by preventing it from venting out. So as we've discussed in the section on ice damming, proper attic ventilation is also important to prevent the freeze-thaw cycles that can cause these problems. So for more detailed information on ice damming, I want you to watch that section of the video. All right, so to properly ventilate your attic, you're going to need a way for the outside air to get in. You're also going to need a way for the air to escape your attic. Okay, so the air coming in is called the intake. The air going out is called your exhaust. Ideally, these functions will be served by an intake venting at the soffit area and exhaust venting at or near the ridge of your roof. Okay, the idea is for fresh outside air to come in, travel across the underside of the roof deck, and then exit at or near the ridge. As we know, hot air rises, so locating the exhaust venting near the ridge makes sense, as that is going to work well with the natural convection of hot air. Now, there are some exacting formulas that you can use to calculate the ventilation requirements of your roofing in your attic space. For the purposes of this video, I'll just say that you really want as much ventilation as possible, and that you want to make sure that all the areas of your roof deck are ventilated. It is essential that you have approximately the equal amount of intake or soffit ventilation as you have of exhaust ventilation. Having a ton of intake ventilation and not much exhaust, or vice versa, isn't going to do you very much good. So if you're into math and you feel like you want to take the time to calculate the proper amount of ventilation required for your house, you can look online. There's a bunch of roof ventilation calculators that allow you to use a formula and the square footage of your attic to determine how much ventilation, square footage, or square inches that you need. So for this video though, let's just say you want as much as you can get. When you're evaluating or installing your ventilation in your soffit, okay, your areas down here at the eaves, please make sure to check that air can actually pass from the vent that's in your soffit up into the attic. Often you might see these vents on the outside, but they've been either painted over or there's been insulation or framing wood that's in the attic between the vent and the attic space that is keeping fresh air from flowing through the vent. So double check. You probably have to look inside your attic and make sure you can see some light coming out of your soffit vents, and that'll ensure that air is actually getting up there. Just the vents alone doesn't mean that any air is getting through there. I see that all the time. So I've got a few different types of soffit vents here. All of these will do the trick. Just keep in mind that you want to have the same square footage of intake venting as you have exhaust venting. So you'll have to space these vents accordingly into the soffit area of your house. If you're starting from scratch, I'd recommend using this type of continuous soffit vent. It's really going to allow the maximum amount of air all down the length of the soffit. If you use those square vents or round vents, just make sure that you space them evenly so that you're getting even airflow. You don't want a lot of venting at one end of the house and not any at the other, or vice versa. We're not going to go into the installation of this product in the video, but I do want to mention that there's a solution for this type of home I've kind of drawn here that don't really have any soffits. There's a type of house that's real popular here in like the 50s and 60s. They built it, didn't really have any overhangs like this. It's harder to vent these types of attics because there's no real soffit for the air to get in. So there's a product that's called the Edge Vent. There's a couple different ones. This one's called the Edge Vent, and it's a good solution for these situations. Basically what you do to install this product is just cut a gap in the decking right at the bottom. You install the Edge Vent piece. It gets shingled over. You don't really see it much. And then the fresh air goes through that vent into the attic right here down near the edge and allows air to go in. So if you use that, you can get it from a roofing supply warehouse. Just make sure you follow the directions carefully when you install it. An important but often overlooked principle behind designing the ventilation system for your home is that you need to stick with one type of exhaust ventilation and resist the temptation to double up and have a ridge vent and say a power fan, or a ridge vent and a turbine. Some people want to have all the ventilation, exhaust ventilation that they can, which makes sense on a certain level, but it's really a mistake, and I'm going to tell you why. The real purpose of your roof ventilation is to draw cool air in at the soffit, up over the underside of the deck, and out at the ridge. What happens if you have two exhaust vents near each other at the ridge is that they short circuit this cycle. The stronger vent is going to pull air in through the other nearby vent and creating a sort of a short circuit loop of air that doesn't really pull any air in at the soffit. So for example, in this example, I've got a turbine vent here and a ridge vent here. And so if this is a stronger vent, what's going to happen is it's going to pull air in through the ridge vent instead of out the ridge vent. It's going to pull air in through the ridge vent. It's going to come up out of the soffit or out of the turbine and then come back around. And so you're going to create the short circuit loop of exhaust air, and it's really never going to pull air in at the soffit. And so this underside of your deck is never going to get ventilated. So keep in mind that if you already have an exhaust fan or turbine or square vent or something in your roof and you're planning on going with ridge vents, you need to remove that device and patch the hole so you just have a ridge vent and soffit vents. So similarly, many homes have vents in the attic at the gable end. So you might have like a little, a lot of houses have like a little round vent or something like this in the soffit. It's a nice architectural feature, but it's been shown that these vents do a very ineffective job of ventilating your attic. That's mostly an architectural detail. So if you have one of these, to prevent this short circuit of air, what you want to do is go inside the attic and just cover that hole up with a piece of plastic from the inside. You don't have to take it off the house, but cover it up from the inside with a piece of plastic to prevent the short circuit cycle that I talked about. On the exhaust side, to get the hot, moist air out of your attic, you've got several options, but by far the best is going to be this type of rigid shingle over ridge vent. If you've got a roof design that has a good amount of ridge in proportion to the attic space, you'll want to go with this option as the most effective and least likely to leak or break in the future. Look for a ridge vent like this that gets shingles applied over the top, and also one that has these baffles on the side. So the shingle is going to cover this part, but this baffle here is on the side. Studies have shown that these baffles are an essential part of the ridge vent as they help to pull air out of your attic. Some ridge vents don't have anything that sticks out, but those are not as effective. So if you don't have very much ridge on your house and you've got like a hip roof with a very small amount of ridge at the top, you'll need to go with one of these two options that I've got here on the table. Either the power fan or the turbine can work to exhaust hot air out of your attic. These come in different sizes depending on the square footage of your attic, so check the instructions to find one that's properly sized for your attic. You might need 2 fans or 2 turbine vents. You want to keep in mind a few things about these products. One is that with anything that has moving parts, they can and will eventually break, so you'll need to replace these at some point. Also, turbine vents only work well if there's attic wind to keep them moving. So if you notice that your turbines never turn, they're either broken or there's not enough wind to keep them moving, and they really aren't doing much to ventilate your attic. The power vents can be a good option, but keep in mind that if you don't have enough soffit intake vents to let the fresh air in, or the fan is way too big for the application, what it's going to do is draw conditioned air from inside your house into the attic and out the vent. You don't want to do that. It's going to pull enough air one way or the other. So make sure that it's sized right and that you have soffit vents. Otherwise, you're just going to be pulling the air conditioning out of your house and into your attic, which is going to defeat the purpose. So these power vents come in a few different models. They all are going to have a thermostat that you have to set up there. It's right underneath the fan after you get it wired in. And I also always recommend to people you get the type of fan that has both the thermostat and what's called a humidistat. And a humidistat is a device that monitors the humidity in your attic, and it turns the fan on to exhaust humid air in the winter when the temperature might not be warm enough to turn the thermostat part on, but the humidistat will activate the fan to exhaust some of the humidity out of your attic in the winter. So now I'm going to show you how to install a shingle over ridge vent. First step is to cut a gap in the roof decking. Now I like to do this before we install the shingles, as it's easier to cut the vent if you don't have all the shingles in the way. And this also keeps all the sawdust off the shingles. That might not seem like a big problem, but especially in hot weather, the sawdust can stick to the shingles and be hard to sweep off. So if you do cut it and you get some of the sawdust on the shingles, go ahead and sweep and blow it off immediately, because after a couple hours or after you've walked on it, really works the sawdust into the shingles, and it just ends up looking bad because it's really hard to get off the coarse texture. So when you cut your vent, you want to end up with a gap that's approximately 1.5 inches at the ridge when you're all finished. Most roofs are framed with a center ridge board that the rafters are attached to. So usually it's going to be like a 2x10 or something like that right in the middle. If this is the case, make sure your gap to either side is at least 3/4 of an inch to make that total 1.5 inches of total gap. So you've got the ridge board, and you got to make the gap on the side of the ridge board. And when you cut it, you'll be able to see if there's a 3/4 of an inch gap or an inch gap for air to flow past that ridge board. If there's no ridge board, like we have here on this model, and that's usually with a truss type roof, just measure 3/4 of an inch down on each side. Make a mark at either end of the ridge where you're going to cut it, snap your lines, and you also want to make sure to stop your cut at least 12 inches from the end of the ridge, or any penetration such as a chimney that might come through the ridge, or for example this dormer that's behind me, and I've got this hip coming into to the ridge behind me as well. So we want to make sure to keep the ridge cut away from those sort of things, because we're not going to be putting a ridge vent over them. Similarly, if you've got another ridge line intersecting, like the ridge that I'm working on, you want to leave the cut short of that area too. So the idea is to prevent any rain that gets near the edge of the ridge vent from going under the vent and getting into the gap. Now, before you cut your gap, make sure to set your saw blade to a depth that will only cut through the decking and not into the rafters below it. This is the same technique when we did the plywood patch in the roof repair section. So most decking is 1/2 inch thick. Set your saw blade to that depth, a little bit more maybe to make the cut, and carefully make your cut on the lines. Watch out as you get near the edge of the roof, as you may be focused on cutting and not necessarily where you're standing. Once you've got the cut made, make sure to sweep away the sawdust, as it can be slippery on the deck and also get stuck into the shingle granules. So once you've got your shingles worked up to the ridge, you're ready to install your vent. Now, I'm just going to say, for demonstration purposes, I didn't actually cut the bridge vent because we need to use the model for some other things, but I think you can imagine what it'll look like when you've got an 1.5 to 2 inch gap here at the ridge. Again, watch out for that ridge board and just make accommodations so you've got an 1.5 to 2 inches worth of gap here at the ridge. You can play around with the ridge vent before you cut your gap, just to get an idea about where the ridge vent's going to sit and that sort of thing. So at either end, what you want to do is place the vent into position so that it's centered on the middle of the ridge. Now, here's the vent that we're going to be using, and most vents have a line like this to help you line it up. Make a mark where one side of the vent lies at both ends of the ridge, and chalk a line to help guide the ridge as it goes across the roof. Now, there's some disagreement as to whether you should run the ridge vent all the way to the end of the ridge or not. The fact of the matter is that the attic space you're trying to vent ends before the soffit area starts. So there's really no point in having the vent that runs all the way to the edge of the roof, because you're not going to have a gap all the way there. However, some people like the way that it looks when the vent runs all the way to the edge of the roof. It's up to you. Most often, I've started the vent a few feet back from the edge, more at the point where the soffit ends and the attic starts. So if you're going to do this, make sure to use the same reveal on both ends of the roof so that it just looks even. In this case, we're going to start the ridge 12 inches back from the roof edge, and as a result, I've also would start my vent so that it starts 6 inches from that point. So if you add 6 inches to the 12 inches, you're going to end up with the vent starting 18 inches back from the edge of the roof. So this is so that the gap in the ridge is not right at the edge of the vent on the outside. So to begin with, you're just going to lay down your cap shingles at the edge of the roof like you normally would. You're going to cover that section of the ridge that doesn't have the ridge vent on it if you don't run your ridge all the way to the end. So keep the ridge caps coming back until you've passed the point where the ridge vent is going to start. So make sure that you've got good coverage under the edge of the vent, as water can get in under that point. All right, so you can see I've got a couple ridge cap shingles on. Again, I'm going to start my ridge vent at 6 inches, but the gap doesn't really start for 12 inches. So that way I've got a nice 6-inch coverage that's going to prevent any water that might get up under the ridge cap, because you'll see when we put it on, it's not completely sealed right there. Any water that gets under there is going to run down the roof and not run into our ridge vent there. So now that I've got these first 2 cap shingles on, maybe your gap's a little longer, whatever, we're ready to put the ridge vent on. All right, so we're ready to install the ridge vent. And what you're going to do to start with is place it along the edge of the line that you've either chalked, or in this case we just traced it with the silver Sharpie because this is a very short ridge. We didn't have to get the chalk line out. But you're going to put it in, get the one side down on the line, and then nail it. And using, again, this comes with these 3-inch ring shank nails. If you don't have that, you're going to want to get some 3-inch ring shank nails. But many vents like this one come with the nails already included. All right, so you're going to want to nail the vent down all along one side first. I like it to keep it even, and then put the nails in along the other side. You can go one and one on each side, but you want to make sure not to kink the vent or buckle it up in the middle. So take your time with the first piece to see how it's going to go on. It's going to depend on the type of ridge vent. Here's one pro tip for you, especially when you're working with roofs like this that are pretty steep. This is a 12-12. you want to be careful to not, your tendency might be to like jam it down and pull it super tight. The problem when you do that, after and you'd see this after you've nailed it on, is you're going to get some buckling because of the tension. So what you want to do, and this is what you're going to do when you lay out your lines, is sort of bring it up a little bit, like fold it over and then bring it up a little bit so that it's not completely tight under tension. There's a little minor gap in there at the top. So if it's pretty cold when you're working, you should leave a small gap between the two pieces to allow for some expansion and contraction in hot weather. When you get to the other end, you'll want to measure and install the last cap so that this end plug piece is facing outside. Once you've got the vent installed, you're ready to apply the cap shingles. All right, so these go down just like any other hip and ridge shingle. You can use either the pre-made hip and ridge shingles like this one, or take tabs from a 3-tab shingle. Start at the end and let the first piece overhang just a fraction. If you're in a windy area, you can place a bead of sealant down here to secure this first shingle. Keep in mind that the glue strip is in the middle of this shingle, so the first one doesn't have anything holding the edge down. Place your 3-inch nail here on the shingle. Make sure not to overdrive the nail and damage the vent, as it will cause the edge to pop up and could also damage the plastic vent. And I'd also make that point that when you're installing the ridge vent itself, you don't want to overdrive the 3-inch nails. You just drive it in, secure it snug, but don't wail on it because you can overdrive and damage the plastic. So also make sure that the ridge tab doesn't overhang the edge of the vent where it'll obstruct airflow. So depending on your preference and where the ridge vent is and how visible it will be, you can either run the shingles all the way down from one end and just reverse the last shingle or two and cap it off, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. Or you can measure and have them terminate in the middle of the vent and work it in from both sides so that they meet in the middle for a more even final look. In either case, that's what we've decided to do here. Is just for demonstration purposes, we're going to put this one piece of ridge vent on. So I brought in 4 ridge cap shingles from one side, 4 shingles from the other side, and we're going to terminate it right here in the middle. So you want to cut your last ridge tab so that it looks like this, and the back end and glue strip aren't visible, and you have a narrow little piece like this. You want to place it so that it covers both ridge caps and glue strips and nail it through the top here. Put a liberal amount of sealant on top of the nail heads to finish it off. So invariably you're going to need a random length of ridge cap, so I just cut this piece off, and I just want to make the point that you always want this part on the end so you can work your way down the roof, and when you're ready to cut it off, trim it and then flip this part so that the closed end is facing out and not inward, because if you let this end open, then there'll be a lot more area for rain, snow, or bugs or something like that to get in this end. So cut it off, turn it around so that this end goes over the roof.
If you'd like the complete series for yourself on how to do shingle or metal roofing, you can go to my website, RoofingIntelligence.com, and there you can get a membership to either stream or you can get a DVD in the mail that'll show you how to do all the steps for either of those types of roofing. Enjoy this video. Thanks so much for watching.